begins. Leaves littered the sidewalk as we braved the cold and walked to church. After scurrying across Main Street, John exited his truck and greeted us. "I need to talk to you two." He tucked his hands deep into his pants pockets and headed inside. John blew into his reddened hands as he scanned the faces of everyone wrapped up in conversations of their own. "I just stopped to check in on Wiley and Malvinia. Woogie's struggling over his father's arrest and wants to talk to you." Liddy peered out the corner of her eye at me. "Of course. When?" "Malvinia is making dinner for us and expects us right after church." I felt Liddy squeeze my hand. "Well, are you going?" "Marie and I will both be there. Who'd want to miss out on one of Malvinia's Sunday dinners?" Arnie preached a heart-wrenching Advent message about God's love. When he reached his conclusion, he closed his Bible and gazed upon the congregation. His final comments struck a chord. Regarding God's admonition on the proper manifestation of his love, God desires us to demonstrate his love not by merely reading about it, writing about it, or even talking about it. In truth, we all tend to be pretty good at those things. Arnie paused with an affirming grin and gentle nod of his head. However, God searches for evidence of his love in our deeds and attitudes as we respond to others. In just 17 days, we will once again celebrate God's greatest love gift that mankind has ever known. Therefore, as we approach Christmas this year, please be mindful that the only gift God desires from each of us is to witness his love shared through our deeds and attitude. After we filed out of the sanctuary, I waited for Joe and Nick to exit the choir room while Liddy occupied Missy and the twins. "Joe, can I talk to you a moment?" I smiled at Nick, but tugged on Joe's arm. Joe looked at Nick. "I'll be right there." After Nick left, he turned to me. "What's up?" "Wilson is in custody." "I didn't hear anything, but that's good news." "Kinda. Mitch stopped by and told me about the arrest, but mentioned he lawyered up and called Gus." "That's smart for any felon, especially one on parole. He stands to lose a lot if convicted." Joe stroked his chin. "He called Gus?" "Well, that's what Mitch told me, and now we've been invited to dinner with Wiley and Malvinia right after church. Evidently, Woogie's not handling the news well and asked to speak with us." "I'll make some calls. Touch base with me tomorrow morning if you don't hear from me." The mouth-watering aroma of Malvinia's ham filled their home. Marie and Liddy ventured into the kitchen while John and I joined Wiley and a sullen Woogie in the living room. "Liddy and I are pleased you invited us to dinner. We've heard so much about your home. It's the oldest house in the center of town, isn't it?" I inspected the decorated mantel after I sat in one of the fireside armchairs. "Well, that's a fact, all right. Every creak and crack in this old home testifies of its old bones, just like me." Wiley chuckled as he admired the built-in bookcases lined with books and framed photos on either side of their red brick fireplace and hearth. John leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I remember Mom and Dad dragged me here for many Sunday dinners as a youngster. I didn't appreciate the smells coming out of the kitchen like I do today." Wiley's eyes lit up. "Well, you were no bigger than Woogie back then." He reached over and poked Woogie's propped-up knee. "Look at Coach Priestley today. I bet you'll grow up to be just as big thanks to your mama's cooking. Ain't that right, John?" John stared at Woogie's reluctant grin. During their exchange, I tried to envision John at Woogie's age, as well as Zach and Betty Priestley, sharing a similar conversation with Wiley about John 30 years ago. It doesn't matter none, Woogie mumbled after a doleful pout. I asked, why would you say such a thing? He examined his pawpaw and John. I'm going to end up like my pa anyway. What you become is up to you, unless you choose to believe your pa's circumstances will hold you back. I clasped my hands against my chest and looked to John and Wiley. Mr. P's right. Your pa's made some mistakes affecting his life, but they're not your mistakes. John sat back in his armchair, eyes glued to Woogie. But, Wiley blurted, buts are for cowards and for those afraid to take control of their own life. Your pa don't want you to fall into the same life he carved for himself. He loves you, boy, more than you'll ever understand. Woogie buried his chin into his chest. Answer me this, Woogie. How did you always manage to break away from all those defenders when you ran with the ball? John glared at Woogie. Well, I didn't want to be dragged down without fighting my hardest because I'd let you and the team down. Well, exactly. It's the same choice you could make about life, too. John's hard stare relaxed and his brow raised. Woogie sat taller and stared at his pawpaw. Hadn't thought about it like that before. How can I help my paw wiggle out of this mess he's in now? Well, I edged forward in my chair. You want to talk to your paw? I glanced at Wiley and John. I suspect you could get him to understand that his future rests in his decision to cooperate and fess up. We believe someone put him up to it, John added. Woogie looked at his pawpaw. Will you take me? Wiley patted Woogie's knee. First thing in the morning. Okay, menfolk, dinner's on the table. Liddy begged me to drop her off at school Monday morning so I could go by Zeb's and pick out a Christmas tree. We'd been so stymied by our weekend away and the events since our Christmas decorations remained in storage. Promise me you'll trust Jim and Jay to pick out the right tree. Liddy leaned over and kissed me. Just as soon as I stop by the post office and check in on Hal. We'll spend tonight getting ready for Santa. I promise. I added a cheery smile as she got out and closed the passenger door. I checked Liddy's note and walked into the post office to pick up the postage for her Christmas card mailing. Good morning, Ray. How are you staying busy on Friday nights lately? Ray fumbled through a drawer and counted 10 books of stamps for me. Basketball season started this week. He continued to smile as he handed me the stamps and my receipt. I'll try to bring my sons to a couple of games over the Christmas break. Thanks, Ray. I walked toward the door, tucking the stamps into my jacket pocket, when I got shoved aside. Hey, watch where you're going, please, I muttered as a knee-jerk response. I looked up and realized who barged past me. Hank, is everything all right? He looked over his shoulder from his place at the end of the line. Yeah, just peachy. What's it to you anyway? You just rammed into me without saying a word. I guessed you had something on your mind, that's all. Hank's disinterested glare lasted but a moment. Look, Mr. Phillips, Hank grumbled, why don't you mind your own damn business? I'm getting sick and tired of you sticking your inquisitive nose into my family's business. Hank, let me remind you where we are. Ray barked. Hank glared at Ray. Do I look stupid or something? No, but you are acting pretty stupid at the moment. Suggest you apologize and calm down or leave immediately. Ray snapped with a stern look at Hank. Hank measured Ray and ground his jaw before he muttered, "Sorry, folks." I winked at Ray and slipped out the door to avoid inciting Hank's hair-trigger anger any further. "Need a hand, Hilly?" Hillary knelt by her desk retrieving some papers. She stood and extended her free hand toward me. "Thanks, just straightening up from the whirlwind that blew through here a few minutes ago." "Well, what happened?" "Hank stormed out of here after getting into an argument with Hal." "What about?" "I'm not sure." After they barked at each other, Hank stomped out of Hal's office, slammed the door behind him, and stood beside my desk, huffing with his jugular veins about to pop. I suggested he take a couple of deep breaths and calm down. That suggestion didn't communicate well. He responded by sweeping his hand across my desk and then blasted me with several off-color suggestions before he headed down the hallway toward the rear exit. What'd Hal say about it? He poked his head out, saw the mess, and asked if I was okay. He apologized while he helped pick up most of the mess. "I'm glad you're here." A frazzled Hal stood in his office doorway. "We need to talk." Hal waved me into his office, then peered at Hillary. "Again, I hope you know how sorry I am." Hillary smiled. "I'll hold all your calls for a while." I stood in front of Hal's desk. "What just happened?" "With Hank?" "Of course with Hank. He just darn near bowled me over in the post office lobby a minute ago and then launched into another tirade about me interfering again. Thankfully, Ray Abernathy intervened and I scooted out the door." Hal leaned up against his desk. "You won't believe what Hank and Dixie have dreamed up." "Considering recent events, there's not much I won't believe." Hal adjusted his rolled-up shirt sleeves. They want to sell their shares of H.H. Archer Holding Company." I reminded Hank that as far as I was concerned, Dad would have to rise out of his grave before I'd allow that to take place. Hank smirked and then asked if Philip and I preferred that they both left Shiloh. When I told him I wouldn't stop either of them, he insisted in no uncertain terms that we needed to buy them out. Otherwise, they'd sell their shares to another interested party. "What'd you say?" Hal snickered. "Philip nor I had that kind of money. Since Hank and Dixie both want to sell their shares, Philip and I can't stop them. They will hold the majority of outstanding shares in the company as of Thursday." "Well, what are you going to do?" "I don't rightly know. Threats obviously don't work, and confidentially, I'm pretty sure Gus Appleton is in cahoots with Dixie and Hank, which is why I asked Joe Arians to represent Philip and me." "Joe will think of something." Hal shook his head. "They've got us over a barrel unless Philip and I can scrounge enough money to keep the shares in the family like my dad, his father, and his father before him desired. Plain and simple, we need a miracle by Thursday." I placed my hand on Hal's shoulder. "Just remember, God's in control. No matter what happens, we'll at least have our home. Just hope it'll be enough of a consolation if they sell the family business out from under us." Later that afternoon, I waited for Liddy outside the school with the Christmas tree Marie and Jay helped me select. After we got home, she pulled out boxes of Christmas decorations while I secured the tree onto its stand in the living room. "Where do you want it?" I asked. Liddy paused and pointed. "How about the same as last year, but a little further from the window this time? We darn near ran out of space behind the tree for all the presents last year." After Liddy approved the right spot, I strung the lights while she got a step ladder and placed the star on top. Stepping down, she asked, "Did you get my stamps?" I walked over to my jacket hanging beside the door. "They're right here." Oh, yeah, I meant to tell you earlier, I quite literally ran into Hank at the post office. Liddy's head popped up as she hung an ornament on the tree. What do you mean by literally? I told her about Hank's behavior in the post office and before that at City Hall. Poor Hilly, she sighed. She should have called the sheriff. Liddy's hazel eyes grew dark and distant as we spoke about Hank. Hal told me he and Philip asked Joe to represent them at the reading of Harold's last testament on Thursday. Liddy picked up another ornament. After all these years handling their family's affairs, why do you think Gus would cozy up to Dixie and Hank, knowing it would create a rift within the Archers? I poked my head out from the far side of the tree. Joe told me he planned to talk with Gus. Joe will get to the bottom of whatever's going on. Liddy stared at the sparkling red and silver ornament she held. Seems that Dixie's bamboozled Hank and seems willing to bust up the family all over some money. I shook my head and shrugged. I couldn't help but wonder how much of Dixie's past might be goading her scheme.